200 Comanche warriors don't just appear, accidentally arrive at your barn for blood for war or justice, and Malister Thaddeus Bear was going to determine which one it was, but let's go on. 24 hours back to the beginning, the Texas sun was beating down earlier. Somewhere, brutally, on Bear's ranch when he was between Amarillo and Nothing, initially noticed the tiny figure stumbling. Bear had noticed at 34 across his property many issues during his years of employment cattle, although there's something about that morning felt off. He was even fixing a damaged fence post close to the water when he noticed movement. A child could not be older than 8 years old, or 9, was making shaky zigzag movements toward the source of his water. The child's torn traditional native clothing, American clothing that was more aesthetically pleasing days, and Bear could see even from a distance, observe how hunger turned every step become a. The majority of ranchers in these areas struggle would have initially grabbed their firearm and later inquired about connection between the settlers and the Comanche tribes in the area had been tense for years of attacks and retaliations, maintaining tension among all. Although Bear had always been unique, perhaps also for his own benefit, he set down tools and proceeded cautiously in the direction of the child, motions and hands visible, purposeful. As he approached, he could see the young girl had dark eyes as well, lips cracked, big for her small face. Dehydrated, she glanced up at him, in a state of both terror and despair that was like a kick to his stomach. The girl spoke quickly in Comanche language. Couldn't comprehend, but what she was saying was, evidently she was maybe starving. Her little hands hadn't eaten in days. Pointed to her mouth and then to a worldwide language of need is the watercourse that broke over all cultural boundaries. Bear considered his neighbors when what they would say if they witnessed him assisting as a Comanche youngster. He considered the alerts he has heard in the community regarding recent conflicts with the tribes he believed about being safe and doing the right thing, action to take next. He investigated those yearning eyes once more and created the choice that would alter everything. Bear picked the girl up silently. She was nearly weightless in his arms. She was brought to his cabin. Refused to fight, too feeble to do so, even if she had requested that he stroll so that he could sense the tremor in her small body, whether he was unable to do so because of fear, hunger, or both. Bear sat inside his small cabin, softly placing her in his lone chair, and hurried to get the supper ready. He had some of the previous night's leftover stew, fresh bread, still warm on the stove that morning, he had baked. The aroma of the girl appeared to be somewhat revived by the food. Then he noticed something for the first time. That could have been a glimmer of optimism in her as he poured the stew into a bowl. His eyes. Bear noticed something that created the girl's body, made his blood run cold. Her torn neck partially obscured, there was a unique jewelry among the clothes, elaborate patterns and beadwork that he'd saw prior to his neighbor. Old Pete Morrison had detailed those precise patterns to him as recently as last week. The beads the family wears for ceremonies of the most potent chief. White Bull Bears is the Comanche leader in the area. Halfway through giving her the bowl, if he believed this female to be, he wasn't merely feeding a hungry person. Youngster. He was keeping the daughter of the guy had the ability to bring 200 warriors on his head without causing any damage. Sweat. But there was no time to make a change. Naturally, the girl was already on her way to Bear and trembling hands for the food, unable to bring himself to reject her. He gave the bowl to her and observed as she consumed food with the intense hunger of a person who hadn't eaten in days. Bear was unaware that 20 miles. A search crew from the Comanche had recently discovered that the girl's trail led straight to Chief White Bull, and his ranch at the head of that was himself. His expression was one of anguish and rage that only hinted at trouble for whoever had abducted the girl. His daughter. After eating, I glanced up at Bear, with what could have been thankfulness, however, as the afternoon sunset started to spread out across his land. Bear couldn't get rid of the sensation that he simply chose the greatest course of action, or his life, or the final decision he would make. The girl dozed out in Bear's seat. Finally, within an hour, fatigue surpassing her little frame. Bear covered using his soul blanket. He attempted to make sure he did the correct thing. But as night fell, that conviction began to waver. The sound of the dirt road's hoofbeats created dropping his stomach. Bear looked through his window and noticed Cletus, his neighbor. Hardly riding toward his cabin, Hartwell Bear recognized two other men from Jake Morrison, the town deputy sheriff, and Reverend Thomas Bear. A local preacher went outdoors before they could dismount in an effort to preserve their voices. Down so as not to wake the girl, but before his time, Cletus was already yelling. "Bear you!" The horse stopped completely. "Damned idiot, what are you doing?" Considering that Cletus's cheeks was flushed with rage and something that appeared to Morrison reports seeing smoke, which is frightening. Indications from the hills the Comanche are searching this afternoon for Deputy Morrison. Someone or something grimly nodded. My dad sent a message from the daughter of town chief. White Bull went vanished while hunting 3 days ago party. Rumor has it that she got lost in a storm. He took a moment to observe, carefully examined Bear's face. Do you have any information regarding a missing? Would you feel his bear? Comanche girl. Dry throat. The wise thing to do would be must tell lies to get them to leave and sort things out, leaving alone. Although these men had been his neighbors for many years, and even though their shortcomings, which they came here to sincere worry. "She's inside," Bear said, muttered softly, weary and half-starved. "I couldn't simply abandon her to perish." The ensuing hush was deafening. The first person to speak was Reverend Thomas. "Son," his voice was little more than a whisper, "do you know what you've done?" Bear responded by helping a starving child. But he could hear how he was saying it. It sounded innocent, so Cletus began to pace. He ran his hands back and forth through. "They will believe you stole his hair. They most likely already believe her hell. That White Bull has the ability to eradicate whole communities for less than this. Deputy Morrison had already provided support. I must report this to his horse. Bear, I have a responsibility, but I'll give you a take the initiative to return her to her people before they discover you in the dark here." Bear inquired, "How come she can hardly walk? Should I go up to a Comanche?" "Camp without being hit by a barrage of arrows," Morrison said. "That's your problem now. I'm traveling to town on his horse to alert everyone else in the event that White Bull decides he might not use you as an example. Pause at your ranch alone while the 3 men Bear rode off, standing by himself in the fading darkness while hearing the girls. He breathed quietly from inside the cabin. Considered saddling up and attempting to locate the Comanche camp. Although he was aware of it, he considered loading her, but it was suicide. Onto his wagon and making an effort to go to the closest town, however, that would only make worse. The reality was that there was no good way out of this. Each choice resulted in the same location as an altercation with one of Texas's most dreaded war commanders. As though his mind had called forth afresh, the sound floated over the plains. The sound of war drums increasing in the distance, closer every minute that goes by. Bears, they weren't waiting, and the blood turned to ice. The Comanche were arriving in the morning. Bear hurried back into the cabin tonight. His thoughts were racing, and the war drums were increasing in volume, and he could now see solitary rhythmic pulses in the slow, systematic and utterly horrifying. This was not the cacophonous sound of a raiding group. This was quite unusual. More structured and countless risky. The girl shifted in the seat. The sound of the drums roused her. Eyes widened, and simultaneously, for the first time, Bear noticed that he had located her. Her face lit up with recognition. Better comprehended the meaning of the drumming. Compared to him, she spoke quickly in Comanche gestures to the door, and then at herself, even in the absence of Bear, was able to comprehend the words he saw. The fear in her actions, she was attempting to convey to him a crucial message. However, the linguistic barrier made unable to communicate, Bear knelt down next to her chair, talking as quietly as "I know you can't, but he could handle. I'm trying, but please understand me, little one. To assist you with those drums that belong to your aren't they pursuing you?" The girl gave a forceful nod, then seized Bear's shirt and dragged him in the direction of the window. She held up both and gestured outside. Her fingers were opening and closing. Bear counted with her repeatedly. Motions 10203. She continued until she had reached what appeared to be 200. Bear's legs grew feeble, and he had 200 soldiers. Been anticipating perhaps a dozen irate braves that he could rationalize in some way, however. 200 was sufficient to level every walking for 50 meters. The drumming ceased abruptly, and the subsequent hush was worse than the noise in some way. Bear went to the window and looked out. Out into the night he initially noticed nothing, followed by the appearance of ghosts from the very first night. He started to make forms flowing across his land. They arrived as warriors in perfect formation, mounted and dispersed in a broad semicircle that was gradually getting tighter even in the moonlight. The area surrounding his cabin, the war paint, was visible to Bear on their confronts, their hair's feathers. These were not men with weapons in their hands, who had arrived to bargain with the girl. Pulled on Bear's sleeve once again, pointing first at herself and then that she wanted to approach them at the entrance. But Bear wasn't sure if that would be beneficial or worsen the situation. What if they believed he had injured her? What if they didn't think she would approach him voluntarily? A single voice yelled from the shadows, conversing in English using a strong accent. However, White's clarity is flawless. We are aware that you have taken something, dude. That is ours. Send the girl out and maybe you'll live to witness grieving. Bear's lips dried up as the voice carried supreme power. This had to be the chief Bear had heard White Bull himself. Tales of the man and how he came together a number of tribes under his direction, how he had never been defeated by the cavalry, which Bear was now about to encounter him in the middle of a discussion that might result in everyone's death. Bear approached the door, but the young woman took hold of his arm with unexpected vigor. She shook her head for someone so tiny. Then she pointed to herself wildly, gestured over her throat, indicating that she was attempting to alert him to something, but then it struck him like a bolt of lightning. Bolt, the chief, wasn't the only owner of the girl. Daughter, she was the sole child of the chief. In Comanche culture, a daughter who made her priceless, not only for his family, but as the bloodline's future if had occurred to her throughout her time in Bear's concern. Even though he wasn't at fault, White Bull's only option would be to exemplify him for the other. Bear would live on in the memories of the settlers. Became increasingly horrified to learn that saving perhaps the girl's life was the simple one. He now needed to demonstrate that he was 200 armed warriors he had rescued rather than stolen. He had roughly 30 seconds to find a way to accomplish that before Chief. After growing impatient, White Bull turning a bear's ranch into a battleground, made the most difficult choice of his life. Unlocked the cabin door and took a step outside, holding his hands high, the female trailing closely behind him. The first thing he saw was something 200 of his worst dreams. Comanche fighters sat still on the beautiful circle formed by their horses. War paint sparkled in the area surrounding his property. Every weapon in the moonlight was aimed straight at him. At the head of a man seated in the configuration could only be the dominant, intimidating White Bull with a silver lining his lengthy eyes that seemed to burn, and black hair. The girl fled in barely controlled rage, screaming out to her father in Comanche. However, rather than the happy Bear anticipated White Bull's reunion, the chief's face darkened even more. He got off his horse and knelt next to his daughter, observing her intently as she spoke quickly, pointing back at Bear. And the bear in the cabin was unable to comprehend that he was able to read the chief's body, but not his words. Language, each and every White Bull muscle, the spring-like frame, was prepared to erupt into violence. Regardless of the girl was telling him that things weren't getting better. Better yet, White Bull finally got up and approached Bear slowly and deliberately. Steps. The remaining fighters stayed mounted, but moved their armaments around the little motion that produces a sound similar to rattles getting ready to attack. My daughter says you fed her, White said. Bull's English was cold and precise. She tells me you gave her shelter, he said, stopped just outside the range of arms. Sufficient for Bear to observe the complex, the chief's chest scars, signs of innumerable conflicts and adversaries defeated. Yes, Bear said in a voice. She was starving, but she was more stable than he was. White Bull couldn't allow a youngster to perish. Examined him for a while, and she also claims to have seen our precious beads. With her family by her side, you knew who she. However, you did not come back right away. Bear's heart fell when she told us this. As soon as everything went bad, I was intending to return her in the morning. At night, she was too weak to travel. White Bull might have answered, or perhaps you considered keeping her as a tradable treasure, returning to us for horses, cattle, or secure travel across our territories. The accusation hovered like smoke in the air. From a burial, Bear sensed the weight of 200 eyes on him. Warriors awaiting the arrival of their chief signal to transform this discussion into a massacre. Bear responded, "That's not true. I simply wanted nothing from you. Couldn't endure seeing a kid suffer what would you toss if you were Bear?" "You are at a war chief's mercy, who had never showed any white man mercy or take a stance and protect your acts, even if they resulted in death. Please let me know in the comments which side you would pick due to what Bear made the decision to ascertain whether there would be peace when the sun rose or on a conflict that would take up the whole. White Bull held up his hand to indicate territory, and each warrior pulled their borings back. Perfectly synchronized, the sound of 200. The sudden knocking of arrows was similar to when death itself inhales. "You will verify what you said," the chief said, silently, "or you'll pass away where you stand." Bear gazed, his thoughts racing. 200 glinting arrow tips in the "How do you prove goodness to me?" Moonlight, a man who only witnessed evil from your kind? Then inspiration came like lightning. "Your daughter had on when I discovered her," Bear replied slowly. He reached into his pocket and said, "Every fighter tense," but he extracted a tiny fragment of ripped cloth off the girl's original garments. That had snagged his. "I preserved the fence post because I believed. Perhaps you'd like evidence that I didn't hurt her." White Bull looked at the cloth. His eyes flickered with realization. Actually came from his daughter's ceremonial garment, the one she had previously when she vanished. She was wearing. Bear, my water supply, kept talking. "I could have driven her if I had grown stronger. She might have been shot for trespassing. Rather, I brought her to my house, and provided I asked her for my own food and blanket." The girl spoke up but received no response. Abruptly pulling at her dad's arm, and she ran, pointing back toward the cottage. Went to the door and signaled him to follow. White Bull, who was curious but confused, signaled for Bear to join them. The girl indicated the cabin's interior. The chair in which she had slept, followed by the bear, had served her in an empty bowl. Stew she pretended to eat before dozing off. Grinned and gestured to Bear. The first he had noticed her sincere grin. But White Bull's concentration was directed toward. On the table sat something very different. Bear's most valuable item is a picture of his own family in tint. His small son and wife were both murdered in the 3 years ago. A cholera outbreak occurred. The image was soiled from handling and encircled by Bear substituted dried wild flowers. "You have lost children too," it says each week. Silently, White Bull stated, and for the first time there was something in his voice. "My boy was about her, aside from his wrath." "Age," Bear answered, his throat constricted. "Perhaps that's why I was unable to turn her removed." White Bull grabbed the photograph, examining Bear's faces. Lost relatives outside of the combat zone kept their stances, but something had changed in the air. The girl ongoing conversation in Comanche apparently. She was telling her father everything specifics of Bear's treatment of her. "You could have taken," she says. White Bull translates an advantage. "A Comanche child and a lone white man, you may have made a ransom demand, using her for defense rather than you, Bear. Just feed her and let her rest." "Hey, I don't disagree with you. I simply cultivate my land and try, people chief." White Bull was peaceful and calm. Extended period of time whilst retaining the picture when he eventually said everyone was taken aback by his statements, including own daughter. "I thought my soldiers would locate a kidnapper this evening. They anticipated to set this place on fire and return your scalp as evidence of our justice." He put the picture down. Slowly, we discover a man who offered compassion to a youngster who could be his adversary. Bear felt hopeful. His chest was flashing, but he could hear agitated activity outside of 200 as well. Warriors had arrived here in search of blood, and their chief was discussing the importance of kindness. Such a letdown could swiftly transform into a distinct type of violence, yet the issue persists. White Bull went on in Bear's optimism. "My warriors can't come back. Crumbled empty-handed, they are unable to communicate their spouses and kids to whom we rode punish a transgression and returned with words only. Bear's blood turned. What are you saying? I'm saying cold? That despite your lack of malice, you have produced a circumstance that requires resolution. Justice was what my people anticipated. Tonight and White, if they fail to grasp it. Bull pointed to the entrance where the sound of voices growing more agitated some of my young troops could be heard. Think that any white man who comes into contact with for whatever reason, a Comanche child must pay the amount that they believe I am being feeble by speaking outside rather than fighting in. Comanche, someone yelled, and the bear, other voices heard the sound. Was unable to comprehend the words, but it was clear from the tone that they were calling. If you're enjoying this story, for blood clicked the subscribe button because what occurs next will decide everything. White Bull appeared nude right. In the eyes, you can only be satisfied in one way. Honor and justice tonight, but it will need something from you, which could be more difficult than dying. Broken Arrow went straight into White Bull's path. His damaged face contorted in anger. Talked quickly in a Comanche accent, growing with every utterance. But Bear didn't require a translation in order to comprehend the contest that is hurled down. White Bull's bear gave a calm but forceful answer. Observed as the two men confronted Chief against the rule of the warriors, and against sorrow infuriated, the girl pressed nearer to Bear's side and he sensed her presence. Shuddering, other fighters started selecting. Some are moving behind Broken Arrow on the sides. Others who are still faithful to their leader. The meticulous attention to detail that had defined their arrival was beginning to fall apart. And Bear became aware that he was seeing something that might cause the tribe to split. Broken Arrow separated and aimed his lance toward Bear and let out a shout that caused White, a number of warriors, nod in accord. Bull's mouth clenched, and as he said once more, his voice conveyed the clear, final warning tone. But Broken Arrow not giving up, he took a step further, sufficiently close forward now that the tip White was nearly touched by his lance. Bull's chest, the problem was obvious. Adhere to the traditional blood for blood could be perceived by the younger as weak warriors at that moment. The girl something nobody anticipated. She moved in between the two men and started to speaking in quick, fervent Comanche. Her youthful voice broke the tension like a blade, and Bear observed Broken Arrow's face changed from fury to perplexity to something that could have. White Bull's silent translation was a shame. She's telling them exactly how she lost her way in the storm, how she went days without eating while wandering, or water, how she anticipated dying by herself till you discovered her on the prairie. The girl kept talking, getting more powerful. With every syllable she indicated Bear, then herself. She said she was napping and mind-eating, the account of how she was saved, and even the warriors who had provided assistance to Broken Arrow was paying attention, and now she's saying, White, tell them about your family photo. Bull went on to describe how she could see when you stared, the grief in your eyes. She claims that you assisted her at it, because you were aware of loss, not because, Broken, you intended to harm our people. Arrow somewhat lowered his lance. Yet his face remained doubtful as he spoke once more. Directly to Bear and the girl this time. He recognized the word Wasichu, the word for white people in Comanche, and not a cordial one. The girl's answer was swiftly and fiercely. She moved closer to Broken Arrow and had conversations with intensity at which a number of fighters genuinely backed off from whatever she was saying was influencing her. Therefore she's asking him, translated by White Bull, if he has kids. His voice was filled with surprise. She is asking him what a stranger would want to take if his child was starving to death. The Broken Arrow's lance in the wilderness fell at his side. But the girl wasn't completed. She carried on talking about utterances now aimed at every warrior. Bear could see the impact all around them. As harsh faces ripple through, the audience softened, and she's telling them that it would be unfair to judge you for your generosity. We are no better than the murderous army. Without first posing inquiries, she is claiming that when we punish mercy, we turn into the white man's belief in monsters us to be the subsequent quiet was. 200 fighters sat silent and deafening, interpreting an 8-year-old's words. Girl who had recently contested their strongest convictions. Regarding justice and retaliation, Broken Arrow finally said his white's voice was hardly more than a whisper. Bull says that his translation was delayed. He claims that maybe the ghost sent his brother a mentor rather than an adversary, suggests that perhaps wisdom does come, and Bear heard the tiniest voices. There is a change in the atmosphere around them. Although the stress persisted, it had changed into a different, perhaps uncertainty, or the start of. White Bull glanced at Bear. Understanding with what could have been honor what my kid just did, something extraordinary. She has transformed a war party into a meeting of the council. But now the hardest phase is about to begin. What's that? You have to demonstrate to them that her belief in our village tonight, you were vindicated. Before the elders who have invested, they hate your people throughout their lives. White Bull pointed to his mount. Are you prepared to stake your entire life on the word? Bear, a kid, gazed down at the girl, who had those same eyes on him, the eyes of desperation that initiated this entire situation. But this time he understood. Instead of pleading with him for assistance, she was offering hers. And in some way it made everything. The journey to the Comanche is different. Village traveled over the landscape for 3 hours. Hidden was something Bear had never seen before. Secret routes and canyons that his people had never found out. As they got closer, there were numerous fires visible to the camp. Bear, shimmering in the shadows and listening to the hushed muttering of voices, when news of the tribal council's arrival met right away. In spite of the late, 7 elders sat in a semicircle at the hour. They have weathered around a center fire. Bear, with a somber expression among the dancing shadows, stood in the middle, intensely conscious of the fact that he was most likely the first white individual to enter this hallowed area and leave a lasting impression. White Bull was the first to speak about it. Describing the specifics of his after saving the daughter, Broken Arrow appeared, who, in spite of his previous change in heart, continued to advocate for conventional justice. In Comanche there was back-and-forth argument, with Bear for what seemed like hours knowing nothing except the sporadic motion toward him. At last, the girl came forward once more. Her tone was serene this time and measured, but her remarks conveyed the weight of her unwavering belief. She said for about 10 minutes without even looking away from the faces of the elderly as she completed. The eldest participant in the council, an elderly man with hair that was white, asked her one question. Her response was prompt, and the steadfast White Bull turned to Carrie. He inquired as to whether she genuinely believes you. Would you put yourself in danger to save a Comanche? Youngster, once more being aware of the potential costs, without hesitation, she responded, yes. Elders discussed with one another, and Bear's heart raced as he waited for their choice, understanding that these subsequent moments would ascertain whether or not he survived. The elderly white-haired man stood slowly, as he spoke. His joints creaked with age. His tone conveyed the authority of decades of wisdom. White Bull remarks stated that we were sent by the spirits. Not a test of our skills, but a test tonight to wage war, but our capacity to identify. Bear, when kindness demands kindness in return, felt a wave of relief go over him, but the older wasn't done. You'll be given permission to return to your land safely. However, you will also receive more than that. The defense of any Comanche tribe. Whoever damages you or your belongings will. Bear could scarcely respond to this advice. There, I'm at a loss for words. Is one prerequisite that the elder went on to mention. Using the translation provided by White Bull, you has to pledge that if any of our citizens come to you when you're hungry, hurt, or you will show them the same thing if you lose. I swear you were kind to this child. Without hesitation, Bear said. What followed shocked everyone. The girl rushed over to give Bear a quick embrace. Speaking for the first time in broken English time, I appreciate you saving me. I'm saving now. You. As the prairie's daybreak broke, Bear returned to his property on horseback with, rather than a fighting party, an escort of honor. The two civilizations that were on the verge of violence had instead discovered a bridge shaped like a single. Cowboy's a small gesture of generosity at Bear's ranch turned into a neutral area where Comanche settlers may get together without risk. He never became wealthy, but never rose to fame. But he spent the remainder of his life with the knowledge that Even the tiniest deeds of kindness can stop the worst calamities, and each and every year on that night's anniversary, and no longer a young Comanche woman famished child, but a well-respected participant in Bear's Ranch would be visited by her clan to enjoy a dinner together and cherish the occasion. When two worlds decided to prioritize comprehension over combat. The young woman who had previously pleaded for food turned become a peacekeeper and translator. Between settlers and the tribal bear lived to reach 73, passing away quietly in his sleep with both of their friends by your side, societies. That had discovered that bravery sometimes it's not about battling. Knowing when to feed someone who is hungry is crucial. Instead, if you're fond of these amazing real-life tales from the past West, click the subscribe button because there are countless more stories of bravery, struggle, and unanticipated heroes in wait. Click the video now for you on the screen. To listen to a tale that is superior to this one has a twist that's so strong you won't quickly forget it. Click on the video.